At Cox, your internet and mobile price won't change for 5 years. That's 5 New Year celebrations, 5 Valentine's Days, 5 4th of Julys, 5 Halloweens, 5 Thanksgivings, and 5 summers that go by too fast. Through it all, your price stays the same with our 5-year Price Lock Guarantee. Cox, a step ahead. Requires 2 gig speeds and gig unlimited mobile. Taxes and fees excluded from Price Lock. Mobile data speeds reduced after 20 gigs.
Quarterback on this list has something to prove. Some need to prove they're elite. Some need to prove they can carry a team. Some need to prove they can evolve. And for a couple of these guys in 2026, it could determine whether they're even the long-term answer at quarterback. Today, I'll tell you the 7 NFL quarterbacks with the most to prove in 2026. I'm Brad Fowler. What's up, PGF Nation? Crack a cold one. Let's get into my list. I don't want to waste any time, guys. My first player is Justin Herbert. Look, this is a controversial player. No matter what list you look at, sometimes he's in the top 5. Some people have him as a top 10 or top 12 quarterback. Some people say he's overrated. Some people say he's underrated. Look, I'm telling you right now, he needs to prove that he's actually elite. Now, the Herbert narrative has historically been about what the Chargers need to do for Herbert rather than what Herbert needs to do for the Chargers. And I think he's at a point in his career where we need to start looking at it that way. Since he entered the league, the offseason conversation has repeatedly centered around he needs better receivers, a better offensive line, better coaching, better roster. And look, a lot of those things are true, but he does have better coaching now. The offensive line should be healthy this year. He could use some help at receiver, but he's got enough talent on the outside to do some real damage. I think the narrative has shifted, and I think it should shift at this point in his career because the latest playoff failure has made this question increasingly about Herbert himself. And most importantly, the Chargers have given him the help. Like I said, Ladd McConkey has been a big-time player. O'Marion Hampton, first-round running back, first-round offensive tackles, Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt. Now, granted, these guys got hurt last year, but they should be healthy. They should have a really good O-line, and he should have enough weapons around him. Of course, the first couple of years of his career, the coaching wasn't great. The last couple of years, he's had Jim Harbaugh. So no excuses there. He's got one of the best coaches in the league. And now they add Mike McDaniel. I think this might be the best OC hire in the NFL this offseason. So the argument isn't that Herbert isn't good. It's not that he isn't a high-level quarterback. I think he is. Here's the bottom line for 2026. The Chargers are positioned to make the playoffs for a 3rd straight season, and they should. At this point, another one-and-done playoff appearance should be considered a failure. The but that conversation around Herbert is starting to become a problem. But the offensive line, but the coaching, but the receivers, but the injuries. Look, eventually at some point, an elite quarterback has to overcome some of those things and elevate the team around him in the biggest games. He's been really good in the regular season. He hasn't produced when the lights are the brightest. He hasn't produced in the playoffs. It's time to break through this year. Now, look, I'm not saying he's got to make a Super Bowl run or anything like that, but he's got to play better in the big games. If you really want to be considered an elite quarterback, not just a really good quarterback, not just a really super talented quarterback, because I think he's already checked those boxes. If you want to be in that elite group, you've got to get it done in the playoffs. And once again, I'm not saying he's got to make a Super Bowl run, but he's got to play better in those big games. His biggest problem isn't that he hasn't had enough help. I think he has, especially these last couple seasons. It's that every time the Chargers fail, there's another explanation for why it really wasn't his fault. Look, I've been guilty of this at times too, because we know how talented he is, but we're at the point now where we have to stop asking what the Chargers need to do for Herbert and start asking what Justin Herbert needs to do for the Chargers. And we know the answer is win and play big in the big games. That is how you become an elite quarterback. So big 2026 for Justin Herbert to prove if he can break into that truly elite tier. The number 2 quarterback on this list, Dak Prescott. In 2026, he needs to prove that the regular season success matters. Look, Dak was not the problem in 2025. He put up borderline, what I would consider elite numbers, 4,500 plus passing yards, 30 touchdowns, only 10 picks, really good QBR. He had a great statistical year, and most of the time he does, but Dallas went 7-9-1. They missed the playoffs. So the argument shouldn't be Dak needs to prove he's a good quarterback. Similar to Herbert in this regard. We know he's a good quarterback. We know Dak can play. We know he's a big-time quarterback. We know that. He's already proved that for the majority of his career. He's increasingly viewed as a top 10 quarterback. Similar to Herbert. He's on a lot of these lists, right? When you talk about, okay, who are the top 10 guys? He usually falls into that range, along with Herbert. Now, the real question is, can Dallas get a top 10 quarterback results? There's a much bigger distinction between he's playing like a top 10 quarterback and getting top 10 quarterback results. Because look, the Cowboys, the defense was terrible. Like I said, it wasn't necessarily his fault that they didn't break out last year. But this year, the excuses are gone because the supporting cast is potentially ridiculous. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens might be one of the best wide receiver duos in the entire NFL. He's got, I would say, a solid running back room, a really good tight end. The offensive line, I think, should be one of the top, 10 in the NFL? Probably one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Pickens, look, that addition, I think, is really important, and it has been important because teams can no longer just focus on CeeDee Lamb. And it creates a dilemma for these opposing defenses because you can't double Lamb, you can't roll coverage to CeeDee Lamb anymore because George Pickens is a problem. And now you're getting a lot of one-on-one coverage on these receivers, and these guys are so tough to cover. And once again, we know the offense was really, really good last year. It's the defense that needs to improve. Well, I think Dallas has done a really good job on paper, at least, to improve this defense. They made significant defensive upgrades, meaning that Dak doesn't need to carry this team, but he needs to be great when it matters most. That part is critical. If the defense improves, and I think it will, I think this could be a top 15 defense in the NFL, far from what they were last season where they were near the bottom of the barrel. The Cowboys don't need Dak to throw for 450 yards every week. They don't need him to go for 300 plus and 3 touchdowns. They just need him to make the right throws, protect the football, and win football games. That's it. So the pressure is not statistical anymore. We know this guy can play. We're not worried about Dak putting up good numbers, playing at a high level. We know he can, and we know he probably will, especially with the talent around him on the offensive side of the ball, especially with the weapons, the O-line. There's no reason why he shouldn't have another big year. He's already produced elite numbers for most of his career. Now it's about translating that production into team success, especially in the playoffs, because we have seen Dak get to the playoffs multiple times and melt down in the biggest moments, play some of his worst football when the lights got bright. And because the Cowboys, like I said, they've upgraded both sides of the ball, Dak will not have any excuses in 2026. That adds real pressure for him to deliver this year. Now, if Dak is truly a top 10 quarterback, shouldn't the Cowboys start getting top 10 quarterback results? Because those results come in the playoffs. So that is what Dak has to prove in 2026.
Quick shout out to our friends at props.cash, the best player prop research tool in the game. Props.cash lets you scan thousands of props across sports books to quickly spot the highest value opportunities. You get real-time injury and lineup intel, advanced filters to find exactly what you're looking for, and even correlated player props so you can see what tends to hit when a player goes over their line. They cover NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, college football, college basketball, and the WNBA. It's legit next level prep. If you're serious about betting smarter, go to props.cash and use code PGF25 for 25% off your first month. That's code PGF25 for 25% off your first month at props.cash. The official ticketing app of Pint Glass Football is now SeatGeek. I can't recommend them enough, guys. I've been using SeatGeek for years. You want to go to a game this season? SeatGeek is here to take the confusion out of buying tickets, making sure you get the best seats at the best prices. With SeatGeek, you'll never have to worry about overpaying for tickets again. How? They put a 0 to 10 score on each ticket, so you know you're getting a good deal. But here's the real game changer. You can get $20 off your first ticket purchase with the code PGFPOD. That's right, $20 off with code PGFPOD. This season, make every game day epic with SeatGeek. Download the SeatGeek app and remember to enter the code PGFPOD to grab your $20 discount.
Number 3 on this list, CJ Stroud. Look, Stroud has to prove that he can carry the team. And it got me thinking about this. So Houston's defense, we know, was absolutely elite last year. I mean, lights out, dominant. They were actually so good last year, Davis Mills could win games with this team. If I'm not mistaken, Davis Mills went 3-0 as the starter last year when Stroud was out. That tells you how good the team is around him. That tells you how dominant this defense was. They don't need Stroud to be great. So you can't simply evaluate Stroud by saying, are the Texans winning? We know they're winning. They're going to win basically with anybody under center who isn't garbage. They can win without elite quarterback play. We know that. What Stroud needs to do is he needs to demonstrate, are the Texans better because CJ Stroud is their quarterback? There's a huge distinction there. Like I said, they can win without Stroud. But the question needs to be, are the Texans better because CJ Stroud is the quarterback? I think that is a big, big question for this team next year. And Houston has spent the offseason really removing any excuses for CJ Stroud. They've upgraded the offensive line. They're going to have a better rushing attack this year. David Montgomery, they've added some free agent offensive line additions. They've addressed it in the draft. They've got legit playmakers at wide receiver. He has enough around him that he should be able to play at a high level. Now we get to see what CJ Stroud can actually do with it. And the contract situation makes this year even bigger. Houston has his 5th-year option, but the potential of him getting a $55, $60 million extension, that discussion really changes the stakes for the Houston Texans. If you're asking for a $60 million a year player, you can't merely be a passenger on an elite defense. You have to be one of the catalysts for why this team enters Super Bowl contention. Look, can CJ Stroud become the reason that the Texans win instead of simply being the quarterback on a team that wins, right? That is the best question here that we can ask. Can CJ Stroud become the reason the Texans win instead of simply being the quarterback on a team that wins? So that is what CJ Stroud has to prove in 2026. And that's why he made this list. Next on the list, at number 4, Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence needs to prove that the potential is finally becoming production. Look, the Lawrence conversation is less about individual stats. It's more about the expiration date on potential. I am tired of hearing about his potential. He's going into year 6. Look, he's going into year 6 in the NFL. And we remember, this guy was called a generational prospect. I'm pointing the finger at myself here. I thought he was as well. We all did. Every draft analyst thought this guy was a really, really high-level prospect, one of the best we'd ever seen. He entered the NFL with unreal expectations. This guy was the best prospect at the quarterback position since Andrew Luck. Now, he's had enough NFL seasons under his belt, that future superstar argument, that needs to become the present tense reality, period. Every offseason brings another version of, this is the year that Trevor takes the leap. This is the year that Trevor Lawrence takes that next big step. Look, at some point, that's not analysis anymore. It's just prediction. Look, he has shown enough flashes to keep that belief alive. I get it. I'm not saying he's been terrible, but the consistency has not matched the expectations. His production has not matched the expectations of what we expect from this guy as a number 1 pick, as a generational prospect. We're no longer evaluating Trevor Lawrence as a prospect. Those days are long over. We need to evaluate Trevor Lawrence as an actual NFL quarterback and his NFL resume. How much longer can we hear he's going to be great? He's going to be great. Look, how much longer can we use that as evidence that Trevor Lawrence is great? He's not great. He's been a disappointment. I mean, quite frankly, he has, based on, once again, the expectations that we had for this guy. If he's going to start to actually enter the conversation of the top quarterbacks in the game, it starts this year. I'm done waiting on potential put up or shut up time for Trevor Lawrence. I'm tired of hearing he's going to take that next step. It's time to take that step. Number 5 on my list, Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts needs to prove that he can evolve as a quarterback. Look, Hurts is a unique quarterback on this list because he's already accomplished what most of these quarterbacks are chasing. Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, proven winner, a guy who's won a lot of games since he's been the starter in Philadelphia. So his 2026 pressure is not about proving he can win. We know we can win. He's already done enough of that. It's about proving he can evolve and elevate the offense. That's the number one thing that Jalen Hurts has to prove in 26. And the real concern here is the ceiling of the offense. Look, the Eagles ranked 29th in passing yards in 2024, 23rd in passing yards in 2025. That is not good enough. I'm sorry, that is not good enough. Hurts averaged just 7.1 yards per completion last year. That's the lowest of his career. The bigger issue isn't necessarily just one bad statistical season. It's the inconsistency and the low ceiling of the entire offense. Philadelphia, look, this is a team that's been able to win despite an underwhelming passing attack. But the formula that they're using has real limitations. And ultimately, that's why the Eagles made a change at the offensive coordinator position again. They bring in Sean Mannion. Now he comes in, brings in a completely different offensive philosophy. They're going to run a lot more under center, a lot more pre-snap motion, a lot more play action passing, more McVay, Shanahan style concepts. What shocker. I mean, what do you know? Another McVay, Shanahan offense. I mean, 90% of the NFL is basically running some version of that offense. So that's not surprising at all. But that's what we can expect to see from this offense in Philadelphia. And Hurts has to show in 2026 that he can master this new system. He can create more easy answers for himself and this offense, be more efficient, be more effective, be more dynamic at the quarterback position. He also just needs to elevate the passing game, period. Because what Philadelphia got from the passing offense the last 2 years, quite frankly, just wasn't good enough. It just wasn't. Now A.J. Brown is gone. That's going to create another challenge for Hurts and this offense. Now it's going to be more of a wide receiver by committee, which is something we saw in Green Bay, which is where Sean Mannion came from. We saw that approach. There wasn't ever a true number one receiver, so to speak. It was just spread the ball around, get the ball to the open receiver. I think we're going to see a lot more of a point guard mentality from Hurts in this offense. The bigger question, this isn't simply a question of, can Jalen Hurts throw the football better? The question is, can Jalen Hurts make the entire offense better? Once again, he's already proven that he can be a quarterback of a Super Bowl team. He's already proven he can win at a high level. We know that. Now he has to prove he can raise the ceiling of the team offensively, especially in this new system. So, once again, Hurts doesn't need to prove he can win. He needs to prove that he can evolve as a quarterback. Number 6 on this list, Bryce Young. Bryce Young, you need to prove that you're a franchise quarterback. Look, Bryce Young's pressure this year is really more existential than the other quarterbacks on this list. Look, we know Bryce Young was the former number 1 overall pick, and let's remember, they traded a future first-round pick to move up and get Bryce Young. That pick that they traded became the Bears' number 1 overall pick the following year. They took Caleb Williams, and it included a bunch of other key players. I'm not going to get into all the key players that they got, but go back and look at that deal because the Bears fleeced the Panthers on that deal. He comes into the NFL. He has a terrible rookie year. Everyone's questioning the pick. 62 sacks as a rookie. The supporting cast wasn't good. I get it. But fast forward to 2025. And he showed some, I would say, legitimate improvement last season. Over 3,000 yards passing, 23 touchdowns, only 11 picks, almost 64% completion percentage. But here's the thing. Improvement is not the same thing as proof. The Panthers need proof. They need to be able to see that this guy is the future of this franchise. The Panthers need to be able to determine this season whether he's someone they can build around long-term, and they need to know this season if he's the guy. The other part of this is that his fifth-year option gives them additional time, I guess you'd say, to evaluate, but it doesn't answer the long-term question. The 2027 quarterback draft class right now looks absolutely loaded. And I think that is actually creating additional pressure for Bryce Young this year. So, once again, I think the big question for Bryce Young is, did Bryce Young finally show us the beginning of a franchise quarterback last season, or did he simply have a better season? And that's a very important distinction that we need to figure out in 2026. All right, number 7, the last quarterback on my list of quarterbacks with the most to prove, Kyler Murray. Look, Kyler Murray just needs to prove you still belong. Kyler's kind of in his own category on this list. Look, he's not trying to prove he's elite. He's not trying to prove that he's a star quarterback. He's trying to prove that he's still a starting quarterback. Arizona moved on from him. They'd seen enough. They were done dealing with this guy. Minnesota gave him a veteran minimum opportunity, basically paying this guy nothing to come be the starting quarterback for him this year. That's called grabbing a guy from the clearance rack, because quite frankly, nobody wanted Kyler Murray. I mean, anybody could have made an offer for this guy. I think the Vikings are paying him a little over $1 million this year. Arizona is still compensating him on the deal that they had for him, but you could have got this guy for basically nothing. Minnesota makes the move. They needed help at the quarterback position, obviously. They're just hoping that they can scratch a lottery ticket here and find a guy that still has some juice and can fit into the system. And look, he comes in, it's a completely new offensive system for Kyler Murray. Kevin O'Connell is one of the best offensive play callers in the NFL, and I think it gives Kyler Murray an incredible opportunity this year. He's also going to be able to play with one of the best wide receiver duos in the league, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. He's going to have legitimate weapons around him. Now, health remains a major factor. It's been a factor for this guy. He's small, he scrambles around, and he gets hurt way too much. He is going to have to adapt to this new system. He is going to have to adapt to more under center football, playing from the pocket, playing on schedule, delivering the ball on time, which is something he has always struggled with. Look, he is a guy that always has to get out of the pocket, always plays off script, just plays way more backyard football than he does system football. And I don't think that's going to fly in Kevin O'Connell's system. Kevin O'Connell's system is from the pocket, playing on time, throwing from the pocket with accuracy and timing. That is not Kyler Murray's strength. So this is a weird fit, and it's going to be really interesting to see if Kevin O'Connell can kind of evolve the offense or make the offense work for a guy like Kyler, or if Kyler can evolve and make it work. It's a weird fit on paper. It's going to be really interesting to see how it comes together this year. But a bad season this year in Minnesota, I think it could leave him absolutely without a starting job in 2027. So he has massive pressure this year, because if you can't succeed in this situation, Kyler Murray, you are not cut out to be a starter in this league. Period. If you can't succeed with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and one of the best play callers in the NFL, then look, you're not cut out to be a starter anymore. So is the question for Kyler Murray is Minnesota Kyler Murray's second act, or is this his last real shot as a starter? So there you have it, guys. The 7 quarterbacks with the most to prove in 2026. Do me a favor, guys. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that follow button so you don't miss any future episodes. Once again, I'm Brad Fowler. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.